Imagine you've just inherited $50 million. You buy the Ferrari, the Rolex, the penthouse with the floor-to-ceiling views. You throw a party that costs more than most people's annual salary. You post all of it. You wear the logos. You enjoy every single second of it. And somewhere across town, in a house that hasn't been redecorated since 1987, sitting in a chair that belonged to their great-grandmother, a family worth 10 times what you are quietly, and without saying a single word, considers every choice you just made deeply, irredeemably tacky. Not because they're better people, not because they're more virtuous, but because they operate by a completely different set of rules about wealth, taste, and what it means to have money. Rules that were written over generations, that are enforced entirely through social pressure, and that the people enforcing them would never, ever explain to you directly. Because explaining the rules, that would itself be tacky. Today we are pulling those rules into the open. We're going to examine, with historical context, sociological research, and real documented examples, every major category of behavior that old money considers unspeakably vulgar, why they consider it vulgar, where those judgments came from, what they reveal about the psychology of inherited wealth, and, most importantly, what these bizarre, specific, often hilarious standards can teach us about class, culture, and the strange way human beings use taste as a weapon. This one is going to be fascinating. Let's go. The foundational principle: why tacky is actually a power tool. Before we get into the specifics, we need to understand something fundamental. The old money concept of tacky is not really about aesthetics. It is about power. Specifically, it is about the maintenance of class boundaries, the invisible walls that separate the genuinely established from the merely wealthy. And understanding this transforms the entire subject from a collection of snobbish quirks into something far more interesting, a sociological system of extraordinary sophistication. The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu spent decades studying exactly this dynamic. His landmark 1984 work, Distinction, A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste, is one of the most important books ever written about how class operates in modern societies. His central argument is deceptively simple. Taste is not personal preference. Taste is a social weapon. The things we find beautiful, elegant, or refined, and the things we find vulgar, excessive, or tasteless are not reactions arising from some pure aesthetic sensibility. They are learned, class-specific responses that function to mark insiders from outsiders, the established from the aspiring. In Bourdieu's framework, what old money calls tacky is what he would call a form of symbolic violence, the imposition of one class's cultural standards as universal standards of good taste in a way that systematically disadvantages people who were not socialized into those standards. The person who buys the Ferrari genuinely enjoys the Ferrari. Their enjoyment is real, but the old money judgment that this enjoyment is common is not a neutral aesthetic response. It is a boundary-marking exercise designed to ensure that financial wealth alone is insufficient for social admission. This is why the rules are never explained. Explaining them would acknowledge that they are rules, arbitrary, constructed, and serving specific social functions. By operating as unstated norms, they appear to be natural, universal, and self-evident. You either know them or you don't. And not knowing them is itself the marker of not belonging. The British sociologist Mike Savage, in his 2015 book, Social Class in the 21st Century, documented through large-scale survey research, what Bourdieu had argued theoretically, that the cultural markers of class in modern Britain, including specific aesthetic preferences, tastes in food, music, literature, and interior design, were more powerful predictors of social class position than income alone. You can have the money. If you don't have the taste, you don't have the class. With that framework in mind, let's look at the specific things old money considers tacky, and why each one makes perfect sense as a boundary maintenance mechanism once you understand the system. Visible logos and screaming brands and the cardinal sin. If you want to, understand old money taste in a single principle. It is this: the louder something announces itself, the worse it is. Visible luxury logos. The Louis Vuitton monogram, the Gucci double G, the Burberry check, the Hermès orange box left ostentatiously on a restaurant table are, to old money sensibility, about as subtle as showing up to dinner with a sign around your neck reading, "I have money and I need you to know it." And that need, the need for external validation of wealth, is precisely what old money finds contemptible. Not because displaying wealth is wrong, but because needing others to see and acknowledge your wealth reveals something about your relationship with that wealth. That it is new enough, insecure enough, that it still requires confirmation. Old money families have had wealth long enough to have thoroughly internalized the fact that it exists. They don't need anyone else to confirm it. The anxiety that drives logo consumption, the deep human desire to be recognized as successful, as having made it, as being worthy of respect, is an anxiety that old money, by definition, has had generations to work through. The result is a taste culture that positively values invisibility, subtlety, and what the fashion world now calls quiet luxury. This distinction has deep historical roots. In pre-modern Europe, sumptuary laws, regulations governing what different social classes were permitted to wear, made conspicuous display a legal matter as much as a social one. Only certain ranks were permitted to wear silk, ermine, or specific colors. When these laws fell away in the modern period, the social norms that replaced them served the same function, regulating who displayed what, and marking ostentatious display as the behavior of the socially insecure. The fashion historian Anne Hollander, writing about the evolution of elite dress in Sex and Suits, 1994, documented how the shift from aristocratic display to understated tailoring in the 19th century was itself a class signal. The new elite demonstrated their security by not wearing the elaborate decorations available to them. The plain, perfectly cut dark suit became the uniform of the genuinely powerful, precisely because it required no explanation. Today, this principle manifests in specific brand hierarchies that are almost comically precise. Within the old money world, there are luxury brands considered acceptable, brands whose products carry quality signals, visible only to insiders, and brands considered new money, whose products are designed for maximum external legibility. Hermès is generally acceptable, particularly items from the older, more understated product lines. The Birkin bag is a borderline case, genuinely expensive and quality crafted, but so famous and so associated with conspicuous display that carrying one is increasingly considered flashy in the most traditional circles. Louis Vuitton's monogram line, despite being owned by LVMH, one of the world's most sophisticated luxury conglomerates, is almost universally considered new money by old money standards, specifically because the monogram is designed to be immediately recognizable at a distance. That recognizability is the point of the product, and that point is precisely what makes it vulgar. Loro Piana, Brunello Cucinelli, the Row, Cucinelli, brands with no visible logo, whose products communicate quality only to someone who knows what they're looking at. These are considered acceptable. The insider knowledge required to recognize them is itself a form of cultural capital. You can't fake knowing what a Loro Piana cashmere coat looks like unless you've spent time in environments where such coats are worn. This is the genius of the system. The acceptable brands require cultural knowledge to recognize, and that cultural knowledge is itself the class marker. The brand validates the taste validates the class. Talking about money, the rule. Nobody explains here is perhaps the most counterintuitive item on the old money list of tacky behaviors. Talking about money, not complaining about money, not asking for money. Specifically, discussing specific amounts of money, what something cost, what something is worth, what you earn, what you paid in social settings. If you've ever been in a room with genuinely old money and mentioned a price, I got this coat for $800. Isn't that great? Or, can you believe what they're asking for real estate these days? You may have noticed a slight, barely perceptible shift in the room, a microsecond of tension, a subtle change of subject. Nothing so direct as discomfort, just a smooth, practiced redirect that leaves you wondering if you imagined it. You didn't imagine it. You committed what is considered in these circles one of the more serious social violations. You brought money into the room. The old money taboo on discussing money has several layers, and understanding each one reveals something different about the psychology of established wealth. The first layer is the privacy dimension we discussed in our last video. Old money has deep structural reasons to be discreet about financial details. Discussing prices, values, and amounts creates a paper trail, or at least a social trail, of financial information that is genuinely better kept private. The habit of financial discretion in social settings is not just manners, it is security practice. The second layer is the status dynamic. Within a group of genuinely wealthy people, discussing specific amounts creates an implicit ranking. If you mention what you paid for something, you are either revealing that you paid more than others, boastful, or less, potentially embarrassing. Either outcome is socially undesirable. The elegant solution, arrived at over generations, is to simply not play the game. The third layer, and this is where it gets psychologically interesting, is the relationship it reveals with money. People who discuss prices are implicitly oriented toward money as a primary metric of value. It cost X dollars is a statement that positions price as an important fact about an object. Old money culture, by contrast, is officially oriented toward quality, history, and meaning, not price. A piece of furniture is valuable because it belonged to great-grandmother, not because it is worth $40,000. A painting is worth having because it is beautiful and meaningful, not because it would auction well. When you discuss price, you reveal that you are thinking in terms of financial value, which, paradoxically, is considered low class, precisely because it implies that the financial dimension is not something you can afford to take for granted. The novelist Edith Wharton, who was herself from a prominent New York social family and spent decades documenting upper-class American manners in her fiction, captured this dynamic with devastating precision in The Age of Innocence and The House of Mirth. Her nouveau riche characters consistently reveal themselves through their relationship to money as a discussion topic. Their willingness to mention cost, to note value, to calculate expenditure in conversation, Her established characters, by contrast, move through a world where money is simply the water they swim in, present everywhere, discussed nowhere. The etiquette writer Emily Post, whose Etiquette Manual, first published in 1922 and updated continuously through the 20th century, codified exactly the social norms we're discussing, was explicit on this point. A gentleman never discusses money in social settings. A lady never asks the cost of anything. These were not arbitrary rules. They were the codification of class-specific behaviors that had been evolving for generations. Today, this norm has an interesting modern manifestation: the old money discomfort with people who publicly research or discuss net worth. The culture of Forbes lists, wealth rankings, and net worth articles, entirely normal in contemporary media, is considered deeply vulgar in traditional old money culture. Your wealth is your private business. The idea that someone would research and publish it, and that this would be considered interesting or legitimate journalism rather than a profound invasion of privacy, is itself evidence, in old money eyes, of a culture that has entirely lost its sense of proportion about money. The house, new builds, McMansions, and the sin of trying too hard. Nothing reveals old money's relationship with time quite like its attitude toward houses, and nothing reveals new money's aspirations quite like the houses it builds. The old money position on housing is, at first glance, paradoxical. The more expensive and new-looking a house is, the worse. The most desirable properties are old, slightly worn, impeccably maintained, but never ostentatiously renovated, and filled with things that were acquired over generations, rather than purchased all at once. This is not affectation. It is the expression of a genuine value system in which time is the ultimate luxury. Let's start with new construction. A newly built house, however expensive, however carefully designed, however meticulously appointed, lacks the one thing that old money values most: history. The house has no story. Its owner has no connection to its past. The relationship between the family and the property began when the check cleared, and everyone who looks at it knows this. Old money families often live in houses that have been in the family for generations, houses where the garden was planted by a great-grandparent, where the library shelves were built to hold a specific collection, where the wear on the stairs tells a story of 100 years of family life. The house is, in this sense, a physical archive of the family's history. Its age is not a liability to be corrected with renovation. It is its primary value. This creates a specific aesthetic that to outsiders can look like mere shabbiness, but is to insiders a recognizable and deliberate signal. The faded chintz sofa, the slightly worn Persian rug, the kitchen that was last renovated in 1978 and works perfectly well, the bathrooms with their original fittings, the windows that rattle slightly in winter. This aesthetic has a specific name in British aristocratic circles. It's called shabby chic, though old money would never use that phrase because it's been co-opted by interior decorating trends and turned into a style, which is itself slightly vulgar. The most devastating thing you can say about a house in old money circles is that it looks like a hotel. Hotels, however luxurious, are designed to impress strangers. They are optimized for visual impact at first sight. They have no personal history, no idiosyncrasy, no accumulation of meaningful objects. When a private house is designed with the same priorities, maximum visual impact, perfect coordination of every surface, nothing out of place, everything brand new, It communicates that the owner values the impression made on visitors above all else, which is, in the old money value system, the precise definition of bad taste. The McMansion, that peculiarly American phenomenon of oversized, architecturally incoherent, new-build houses in suburban settings, is, from an old money perspective, one of the most complete expressions of new money aesthetics ever developed. Everything about the McMansion is optimized for signaling the size, larger than any functional need requires, the fake historical architectural details, columns that serve no structural purpose, arched doorways that reference a tradition the house has no connection to, the 3-car garage prominently placed at the front, the swimming pool visible from the street. Every element is designed to communicate wealth to a passing observer who has no other information about the owner. The architectural critic Kate Wagner, whose McMansion Hell blog became a cultural phenomenon precisely because it articulated this critique in accessible terms, documented how McMansion design prioritizes street-facing display over functional interior space, creating enormous entrance halls and soaring foyers that are architecturally impressive but practically useless at the expense of functional kitchen space, comfortable bedrooms, and private outdoor areas. Old money houses reverse this priority entirely. The entrance may be modest, even in the English tradition, aggressively modest. The real quality of the property reveals itself gradually through use and familiarity. The garden, visible only from inside. The library, discovered on the way to the sitting room. The quality of the cooking smells from a kitchen that is warm and slightly chaotic rather than showroom perfect. The principle is consistent with everything else in old money taste culture. What can be seen immediately by a stranger is worth less than what reveals itself over time to someone who belongs there. Social behaviors, the specific things that give you away. We've covered objects and spaces. Now let's get into behavior, because this is where the old money rulebook becomes simultaneously its most specific and its most revealing. And I want to be direct. Some of these rules are going to seem bizarre. Some are going to seem petty. A few are going to make you laugh. But every single one makes perfect sense within the logic of the system we've been building throughout this video. Dropping names and titles. Name dropping, the casual insertion of famous, powerful, or prestigious connections into conversation, is considered one of the more reliable indicators of social insecurity in old money circles. And the logic is impeccable. If you genuinely know the people you're dropping, you don't need to establish it this way. Your social position is demonstrated by the texture of your entire life, not by a single conversational gambit. The etiquette consultant and social historian Judith Martin, better known as Miss Manners, has written extensively about this dynamic. Her observation, the need to prove social connections through direct statement, is always evidence that those connections are not sufficiently established to prove themselves. What's particularly interesting is that old money families often have connections that would make a name dropper's head spin, and they absolutely never mention them. The discretion with which genuine connections are maintained is itself a form of social sophistication. You know who you know, they know who you are, and neither of you needs to tell anyone about it. The compliment that reveals your surprise. This is a subtle one, but it is considered particularly telling. The compliment that reveals surprise at quality. This is actually really good wine. The word actually reveals that you expected it might not be. Your house is so much nicer than I expected. The phrase, "then I expected," reveals what you expected. I didn't know you could get food this good outside of a restaurant. The whole sentence reveals a reference point that wasn't formed in houses where food this good is normal. Old money is alert to this pattern in a way that is almost paranoid, because they have spent generations giving and receiving compliments in environments where the baseline quality is high enough that surprise is genuinely inappropriate. A compliment that implies surprise is a compliment that reveals your unfamiliarity with the standard. Photographing food and experiences. The social media practice of photographing meals, hotel rooms, views, and events before experiencing them is, to old money sensibility, a symptom of a broader disease: the prioritization of the record of an experience over the experience itself. The philosophy underlying old money's contempt for this practice is the same philosophy underlying their contempt for logo goods. The need to document and share implies that the experience is not complete in itself, that it requires external validation through the reactions of an audience. This need for validation is, in the old money worldview, the defining characteristic of insecurity. There is also a privacy dimension. Photographing a meal at a private dinner party documents the location, the company, and the setting in a way that is fundamentally at odds with the discretion that old money culture demands. You are creating a public record of a private occasion. In the old money world, private occasions are private. That is rather the point. Arriving fashionably late. The practice of arriving late to a social event as a status signal, the idea that your time is more valuable than others, and that making an entrance demonstrates this, is considered in old money culture straightforwardly rude, not fashionable, not powerful. Rude. The old money position on punctuality is precise and revealing. You are on time because you respect the host and the other guests. You are on time because your social calendar is disciplined rather than chaotic. And you are on time because performing lateness as status is the kind of theatrical social gesture that is beneath people who are genuinely confident in their position. The social historian David Carradine, writing about the culture of the English aristocracy in The Decline and Fall of the British Aristocracy, 1990, noted that punctuality was considered one of the primary markers of good breeding in the English upper class, not because they were particularly organized, but because their social confidence was sufficient that they felt no need to use time as a theatrical tool. Over-tipping publicly. This one surprises people. Conspicuous over-tipping, the loud, visible, almost performative act of leaving an extravagant gratuity and making sure people notice, is considered tacky. Not the tipping itself, which is entirely appropriate and expected, the performance of the tipping. The distinction is precise. Generosity is a private virtue. When it is made public, when the size of the tip becomes a social statement, a signal to everyone present that you are the kind of person who tips extravagantly, it transforms from generosity into performance. And performance of virtue is, in old money culture, one of the most reliable indicators of its absence. Wearing brand new everything at once. This is a sartorial version of the broader principle. Appearing at a social event in an outfit that is obviously entirely new, new shoes, new suit, new shirt, new tie, all purchased together and worn for the first time simultaneously, signals something that old money finds uncomfortable, that the outfit was assembled for the occasion rather than worn naturally as part of the established wardrobe. Old money dressing involves a patina. The shoes have been worn and polished many times. The jacket has been to the tailor for adjustments. The belt is slightly broken in. The watch was a gift or an inheritance. Things accumulate gradually and are worn comfortably, not deployed as a coordinated statement. An outfit worn entirely for the first time is functionally a costume, and costumes reveal that you are performing rather than simply being. Discussing investments in luxury goods. The recent trend of treating luxury goods, handbags, watches, wine, art, as investment vehicles and discussing them in those terms is considered deeply vulgar in old money circles. Not because investing in these things is wrong, but because framing their acquisition in financial terms reveals that the primary relationship with the object is financial rather than aesthetic. You don't buy a Patek Philippe watch because it will appreciate. You buy it because it is a beautifully made instrument that you will carry for your entire life and leave to your children. If you're discussing it primarily as an investment, you've revealed that your relationship with quality objects is fundamentally transactional, and that transactional relationship is precisely what old money taste culture is designed to transcend. The fascinating exceptions, where old money breaks its own rules. Here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because old money does not always follow its own rules, and the ways it breaks them reveal something important about what the rules are actually for. The eccentric exception. Old money culture has a deep tolerance, even a celebration, of genuine eccentricity, not performed eccentricity, not the calculated quirkiness of someone who wants to seem interesting, but the real, authentic, slightly alarming eccentricity of someone who is so deeply secure in their social position that conventional behavior is simply not relevant to them. The English aristocracy has produced eccentrics of breathtaking commitment. The fifth Duke of Portland, William John Cavendish Bentinck Scott, spent decades in the 19th century constructing an enormous network of underground tunnels beneath his Nottinghamshire estate, some large enough for a carriage, so that he could move about his own property without being seen. He required his servants to pretend not to see him even when they passed him in the corridor. He ate alone, always, and communicated with his staff through notes slipped under doors. This is, by any objective standard, bizarre behavior. And yet it was never considered tacky because it came from an absolutely secure social position and was entirely authentic. He wasn't performing strangeness. He simply was strange. The distinction old money draws is between behavior that is strange because it is authentic and behavior that is designed to impress. Authentic strangeness is fine, even admirable. Performed strangeness, like all performance, is tacky. The reverse snobbery exception. Old money culture also has a tradition of deliberate, almost theatrical reverse snobbery, the celebration of simple, unfashionable pleasures, specifically because of their simplicity. The old money person who insists on eating at a particular unfashionable diner, who vacations somewhere unglamorous rather than following the fashionable set, who drives a modest car when they could drive something spectacular, who wears a $30 watch alongside a $40,000 one. This behavior is not a violation of old money taste rules. It is a sophisticated expression of them. The logic, someone who is genuinely secure in their social position doesn't need to optimize for status signals. They can enjoy a greasy diner breakfast precisely because they are not in danger of being judged by it. The freedom to enjoy unfashionable things is itself a luxury that only genuine security can afford. This is why old money reverse snobbery is not the same as middle-class modesty. Middle-class modesty avoids conspicuous consumption because it is outside the budget. Old money reverse snobbery enjoys cheap pleasures while being completely capable of the expensive ones. The freedom of choice is what distinguishes them. The old car, the broken-in boot, the ancient shotgun. There is a category of objects in old money culture that are genuinely worn, genuinely old, and genuinely beloved, and that carry more status precisely because of their age and condition than any new equivalent would. An ancient Land Rover Defender with 200,000 miles on the odometer, driven by someone who could replace it with anything, is a more powerful status signal in certain English country circles than a new Range Rover Sport. The broken-in riding boot that belonged to your grandfather is worth more, in old money terms, than a new pair from the finest bootmaker in London. The family shotgun with its engraved stock and its decades of use is an object of genuine reverence. This is not because old money is sentimental. It is because these objects embody the core old money value, depth of relationship over time. You cannot fake a 40-year relationship with a pair of boots. The age and wear is the proof. What all of this actually tells us: the deeper truth. We've spent this entire video documenting a set of rules that, on the surface, might seem like pure snobbery. Rules designed to exclude. Rules maintained by people with a vested interest in keeping others out. And there is truth in that critique. Bourdieu was right. Taste is a social weapon, and it is wielded by those who have it against those who don't. The old money concept of tacky is, at least in part, a mechanism for maintaining class boundaries in a society that officially doesn't have them. But there is something else going on too, something worth taking seriously even if you find the snobbery repellent. The old money rules about taste are, at their core, a set of principles about the relationship between human beings and material things. And some of those principles contain genuine wisdom. The principle that things become more valuable through long relationships rather than through price tags. That the worn boot is worth more than the new one because of what it represents, is a genuine insight about value that the consumer economy actively tries to suppress because it is bad for sales. The principle that the need to display wealth publicly is a symptom of insecurity rather than success, that genuine confidence doesn't require external validation, is a psychological insight supported by decades of research on hedonic adaptation and the empty promises of status consumption. The principle that conversations about money as a primary metric of value reduce both the speaker and their relationships. That human connection is impoverished when it is filtered through financial comparison is a social insight that finds expression in virtually every serious ethical tradition in human history, from Aristotle to Adam Smith to modern positive psychology. The problem is not the principles. The problem is the way they are deployed as exclusionary mechanisms rather than genuinely shared values. The family that uses the tacky label to prevent their child from marrying someone from a different background. The club that uses taste as a proxy for race or religion in its membership decisions. The institution that uses cultural capital requirements to systematically disadvantage people who were not born into the culture that those requirements encode. These are real abuses of real principles, and they are worth naming clearly. But here is the takeaway I want to leave you with. Because this series is about understanding, not just judgment, the most powerful insight in old money taste culture is not any specific rule about logos or house design or talking about money. It is the underlying orientation toward depth rather than surface, toward time rather than immediacy, toward relationships rather than transactions, toward being rather than performing. That orientation is available to everyone. It costs nothing. It requires no trust fund, no prep school, no membership in any club, and it produces, in both financial and human terms, outcomes that are, on average, significantly better than the alternative. The irony is that the people who most perfectly embody old money values in their financial behavior are often people with no old money connection whatsoever. The first-generation immigrant who builds a business slowly and reinvests patiently. The middle-class family that buys quality things rarely and takes care of them for decades. The entrepreneur who is too busy building something real to spend time signaling status to people who don't matter. These people are, in all the ways that actually count, far more old money than the person who has the trust fund, but deploys it anxiously, competitively, and with one eye permanently on whether anyone is noticing. The rules, it turns out, were never really about the money. Tacky, in the old money vocabulary, is a verdict delivered quietly, without explanation, about behavior that violates a code of values that was never written down and never openly discussed. Understanding that code, as we now do, reveals something important. It is not primarily a code about aesthetics. It is a code about security, about the difference between performing wealth and inhabiting it, about the difference between needing validation and not needing it, about the difference between a relationship with money that is anxious and a relationship with money that is settled. None of that security comes from the money itself. Some of the most anxious, performative, validation-seeking people in the world are extremely wealthy. And some of the most genuinely settled, self-assured, taste-secure people have modest financial means. What old money taste culture, at its most honest, is trying to describe is not a class position. It is a psychological state, a relationship with the material world that is characterized by depth, patience, authenticity, and the profound confidence of someone who does not need you to notice what they have. That state is available to anyone. The Ferrari is optional. Comment below. Which of these surprised you the most? And honestly, are you guilty of any of them? No judgment. We all are. Tell me in the comments. Hit like if this is genuinely changing how you think about class, money, and taste. It takes 1 second, and it helps this channel reach people who'd never find it otherwise. Subscribe and ring the bell. The next video in this series is why new money fails to become old money, the exact mistakes that destroy fortunes in a generation. It is, I promise you, the most practically useful video in this entire series. Share this with someone who just bought a Gucci belt, not to make them feel bad, just because they deserve to know the game they're playing. I will see you in the next.